All right, high rollers, UFC 205 quickly approaching. Can't wait for this one. November 12th in New York City, Madison Square Garden, home of the legends. Muhammad Ali's fought there. Headlined by Conor McGregor versus Eddie Alvarez. And here to talk about it is the South African phenom, the sports betting whiz, the Don, Chris DeBeer. Chris, welcome to the show, man. We haven't had you on in a while.
No, it's been quite a while since I was last on the show, but a lot's happened since then and a lot of exciting stuff coming up.
Well, I'll tell you what, we always seem to get together when Conor McGregor is about to enter the octagon. This one's special significance because he's going for UFC belt number 2. Wouldn't this be something?
This would actually be an incredible achievement if he can pull it off. And it just seems the Conor train, the Conor McGregor show, whatever you want to call it, when Conor McGregor's fighting, the whole world seems to tune in to watch anyway. So Conor McGregor is the big money man in the UFC at the moment, so it's only fitting that we have to have another conversation about it.
We've seen some epic press conferences with Conor McGregor, of course. The big one, what was it, UFC 186, when he had all the big stars there, called it Red Panty Night. Then, of course, the water bottle throwing incident with Nate Diaz. And now UFC 205 press conference. That was epic as well, wasn't it? All the big stars on the same stage promoting this New York event, and it was the Conor McGregor show.
You know, it's unbelievable the way he is able to just pull everyone in to focus solely on him. They've got a whole group of people up there. You had Frankie Edgar up there, a former world champion. I don't think he was asked a question, and if he was asked a question, he gave a 2-second answer, and the guys were back to Conor McGregor. Some guys try to go back and forth with him. Didn't work out very well. So Conor McGregor knows when the bright lights are on, that's when he shows up and that's when he delivers.
What do you do in a situation like that if you are, say, a Frankie Edgar? You've got this mega superstar just dominating the show. We saw Jeremy Stevens try to, stick up for the group, stick up for himself, and Conor basically just shut him down saying, who the fuck is this guy?
Yeah, that Jeremy Stevens incident I've seen replayed on social media so many times now. That was one of those clips that just took Conor McGregor to a new level of stardom. Everyone loved it. It's really a difficult situation because McGregor is so sharp, he's so quick-witted. Anything you say, he's got an immediate comeback off the cuff. The fans are going crazy for him, they're chanting for him, so anything he says is automatically getting a reaction. So it's really tough if you're a guy like Frankie Edgar who's maybe not as outspoken, or anyone else on the card for that matter. They really just can't get a word in, and even when they do, the fans just don't seem that interested.
We saw the Nate Diaz strategy in those situations. He basically, had the one-liners but didn't say much. What do you make so far of Eddie Alvarez and how he's handling it? He says, hey, it doesn't faze me. I'm just going to hit him hard.
Yeah, Eddie Alvarez is an interesting character, and I think he's handled it quite well. If you looked at that press conference, he did go back and forth with McGregor a few times. There was some interesting back and forth. It doesn't seem McGregor's got in his head at the moment, but as we saw with guys like Jose Aldo and Chad Mendes, McGregor has a way of getting in your head and making you fight the style he wants you to fight. And that'll be interesting to see, because if Eddie Alvarez comes in the cage just trying to knock off McGregor's head, I think it's going to be a short night for him, and I think McGregor will knock him out quite quickly.
Yeah, we've seen Coach Kavanaugh, John Kavanaugh, and some others in the inner circle of Conor McGregor suggest that 155 is really where he's meant to be for his body frame. This is going to be a very interesting fight because, as of right now, I believe Eddie is suggesting that he's going to stay and stand toe-to-toe with Conor. I don't know if that's the best strategy. Eddie's a world-class wrestler.
Yeah, I also think that would be a mistake. I think Eddie's best chance is to wrestle McGregor in the opening rounds. We saw in the Nate Diaz fight, or both Nate Diaz fights, Conor McGregor gassed late in that second round. We haven't really seen him too much in his other fights. He's knocked guys out quickly. So if Eddie Alvarez can grind him out those first few rounds, and if you're on the bottom and someone is just grinding it on top of you, it's absolutely exhausting. So if Eddie Alvarez can do that, test the gas tank of McGregor, I think he could get a finish in the 4th or 5th round. But if he goes out there trying to stand with him, I think McGregor's left hand will eventually find home and eventually put him out.
Do you think Conor's bringing anything new to the table for this fight? We've seen him spend $300,000 on a training camp before. I really think that the bell's going to go and he's just going to walk forward.
I also think McGregor's going to just move forward and he's going to look for that killer punch. He's got so much power in that left hand. If he connects with Eddie Alvarez is going to go down. I saw a training video with Conor the other day that was showing him working on some of his wrestling. So maybe that's an area he's focusing on, his wrestling defense. He obviously just wants to get back to the feet, and that's where he wants the fight to stay. That's where he has a big advantage.
I always ask you this, and I know you like to wait until the weigh-ins. They do the weigh-ins differently now. You get to do it at 10 o'clock in the morning. But wondering, do you have your mind set on this one? If you were to bet it, who would you take?
I like Conor McGregor to win this fight. At the moment, the line, I don't really like it at minus 160 or whatever it is in that range. The problem with these Conor fights is that this is a close fight, but because there's so much public support behind Conor, so many people betting Conor, his lines tend to get inflated to the point where you can't really bet on Conor McGregor to win, even if you do think he will.
Now, before we talk about some of the other fights on this scintillating card, what about Madison Square Garden? First time in New York legally. I mean, it's one of the biggest houses in the world. It's very famous for fights. I mean, this has got to be a big thrill for everyone there.
Yeah, this is a massive deal for the UFC. We've heard Dana White and Lorenzo Fertitta talking about getting into New York and specifically Madison Square Garden for years. And it's just kind of strange that when they finally get in, they've sold the company to another group. So that's an interesting turn of events. But they put together a massive card. We've got 3 title fights. We've got Chris Weidman on it as well, Rashad Evans, Donald Cerrone. It's a crazy, crazy fight card. And I believe they've already broken the gate record at Madison Square Garden. So things are looking good for UFC and Conor McGregor.
The co-main event could be spectacular. Tyron Woodley versus Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. You talk about one guy who's got a lot of speed and a lot of power and can wrestle, he'll come at you. And then the other guy who does his karate thing and puts on a show every time, it seems. This is going to be very interesting to me because I think if there's one guy who can penetrate the kicks and the special techniques that Wonderboy uses, it's going to be Woodley with his outstanding foot speed.
Yeah, Woodley is a guy that has kind of been underrated in his career, I think. Even going up into that title match, no one expected him to win it. And he went out there and he put out Robbie Lawler, which is an incredible achievement in itself. So Tyron Woodley comes into this match as the underdog once again. But this Wonderboy Thompson is a special talent. I like him a lot.
I have to admit, I found that very interesting. And I even find myself talking about Woodley as the underdog. Let's not forget, he's the champion and just put Robbie Lawler to sleep. But everyone's fascinated with Wonderboy because of his technique. How do you think Woodley's going to penetrate and get in there?
I think Woodley is going to... He always comes in with a smart game plan. Woodley is not a guy who's going to get kind of crazy and throw crazy things. He's a guy who's going to go in there, he's going to work on a game plan with his team, and he's going to try and execute it. How he does it against Wonderboy Thompson, I'm as intrigued as everyone else because at the moment, to me, Wonderboy Thompson looks almost unbeatable. But I guess it would have to be Tyron Woodley would have to try and out-wrestle him. And then he doesn't really want to get into too much of a striking match, I don't believe, because that's where things could get dangerous.
We saw at the UFC 205 press conference, as soon as he picked up the microphone, he was booed. What do you make of that for Tyron Woodley? Why do you think he is disliked by the fans in general?
You know, I actually take a different perspective on this. I think that Tyron Woodley getting booed is actually a great thing for him because 2 or 3 fights ago, no one cared about Tyron Woodley. If he was fighting on the card, sure, you knew it would be entertaining, but no one was tuning in for Tyron Woodley. Getting booed is a much better reaction than getting no reaction at all. If he wants to sell tickets and he wants to be part of this UFC pay-per-view model, he's either going to be the good guy or the bad guy, and if he's going to be the bad guy, he might as well embrace it.
Joanna's fighting as well. I think she's going to take that fight. Chris Weidman versus Romero is interesting. Weidman coming off the loss. If he wins this one, he might have another title shot.
Yeah, I do believe that if he wins this fight, he will get a title shot, and that's going to set up an interesting match with Bisping. Obviously, those guys have had lots of words back and forth, and for them to finally step in the cage is going to be an exciting event.
We've also got Miesha Tate on the card, Joanna Jędrzejczyk, Raquel Pennington. But the one fight that really intrigues me on the main card is Kelvin Gastelum versus Donald Cerrone. I mean, Gastelum is just one of these guys that can take a shot. His head is thick and it's tough. And Cowboy just seems to do his thing every time with all these different techniques. This is going to be a very intriguing fight in my eyes, and I really like Kelvin's chances.
I also like this fight a lot. Donald Cerrone obviously always comes to play. He's always entertaining. It seems the only fights he ever loses are title fights. And Kelvin Gastelum, this has got to be one of the best guys who's ever come off the Ultimate Fighter. He's really done extremely well. It's a really tough fight to pick. If I had to go one way, I'd probably go Cerrone, but I wouldn't have enough confidence to bet on him.
And then look at the undercard. I mean, you talk about a fight night. The undercard, okay? These are the prelims. Rashad Evans versus Tim Kennedy. I don't even know how to say the guy's name again. Khabib. I'll call him
Khabib.
Khabib versus Michael Johnson. Then you got Frankie Edgar and Jeremy Stevens as the headline of the undercard of the preliminaries. I'll tell you what, one guy I'm worried about at UFC 205 is Frankie Edgar, because this Jeremy Stevens guy looks like an absolute beast.
And he's absolutely got crazy knockout power. In his last few fights, he's just that guy that's going to come forth and try and knock you out. It's an interesting fight because Frankie Edgar's kind of the guy who grinds you out. He's a very good boxer, but he doesn't really have that knockout power. Jeremy Stevens is the opposite. Maybe not as good technique, but if he connects, then you're probably going down.
Okay, so UFC 205, November 12th, Madison Square Gardens. Is this the greatest fight card in UFC history, do you think?
If it stays like this with no injuries, touch wood, then I do believe this is the best fight card ever. 3 title fights. We've got Weidman, Evans, Cerrone, Edgar, Misha Tate. The list just goes on and on and on. It's a great fight card, and I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, and we're going to get your Twitter address up, and I know before the fights happen, after the weigh-ins, we're going to get your predictions via social media. Now, let's rewind a bit. UFC 204, an epic 5-round battle, a war between Michael Bisping and Dan Henderson. Hendo's last fight ever in the UFC. A lot of people think Henderson won. I don't. I mean, I think Bisping was just way too active. He was way more active than Henderson, although it came close in that first and second round when Hendo dropped the H-bomb a couple of times.
Yeah, I'm one of the people that thought that Hendo won that fight. I thought he won rounds 1, 2, and 5. Very close fights, but at the end of the day, I think you've got to give it to the guy who at the end of the fight had not a mark on his face compared to Bisping, who was all busted up.
I mean, that was one of the classic lines all time in a post-fight octagon interview. Dan Henderson talking to Joe Rogan, and he says, I wish they judged the fights on how your face looks after the fight, because you're right, Bisping was just done.
It's an interesting topic to bring up because lots of fans go back and forth on MMA scoring and whether it's done right and should we follow the boxing model or should we judge the fight as a whole. And this was one of those fights that just seemed to bring this conversation to the forefront of mainstream media with everyone talking about, is this the right way to judge an MMA fight? And I guess that's a discussion that's going to go on for years to come.
Well, one thing we got to say about Left Hook Larry, Michael Bisping, is that he has certainly had a resurgence in his career. And I'm wondering what you think the effect of USADA has had on that. Over the years, he's fought many guys, including Hendo, in their first fight that have been on something. And now USADA comes in, and all of a sudden, Bisping is on fire.
Bisping is a guy who's always said that he's clean. He's the only guy that's clean. All these other guys like Vitor and those guys in the TRT era are juicing it up, and it's not fair. And he's kind of been proven right to an extent. Obviously, Hendo, you could argue, is out of his prime right now, and Anderson Silva was out of his prime as well. But he's still beaten those guys, and he knocked out a prime Luke Rockhold. So good for Michael Bisping. It's great that he's finally getting his big moment in the spotlight at the end of his career.
In a certain way, it was kind of tough to watch that Hendo-Bisping fight because I was cheering for both of them because they're both veterans. They've both done a lot for the sport. I like Bisping's character, his talk, and Hendo, everyone respects the guy. So it was really an interesting fight.
No, it was a great fight, and at the end of a fight like that, it's really hard to call someone the loser. And one thing about Michael Bisping, I don't think he gets enough credit. He was really the first Conor McGregor. He was the guy out there in the nice suits, talking trash, trying to build up fights. He just didn't have the knockout power in the early on. He didn't put together enough wins. But Michael Bisping really deserves a lot of respect, coming off one of the early Ultimate Fighters. And he's really made it into an excellent career for himself. And for him to finally get a world title, I think is fitting.
Do you have any thoughts on the new management's decision to pull The Ultimate Fighter off TV? They're not doing that show anymore.
No, well, these guys obviously paid a lot of money for UFC. $4 billion, I believe, is the number. So they're going to be looking to cut costs wherever they can in order to get their money back. So I would expect that we're going to see quite a few cuts coming on an employee front. And I think a few of the minor shows and things are also going to get cut.
All right, well, one of the things that will help them recoup some of their losses is the return of Ronda Rousey, and it's official. It's happening in December. Amanda Nunes, the champion, will defend against the one-time champion. A lot of fighters think it's unfair that Ronda's coming back after some time for a title shot, but if you're in the UFC's position, I mean, why not? She's a big name.
Ronda Rousey is the biggest woman pay-per-view draw they've ever had. She's probably the second biggest pay-per-view draw behind Conor McGregor, so there's no doubt that you have to bring her back. You have to put her straight into a title shot, headlining a card, because we don't know where Ronda is at the moment. She obviously had that devastating loss to Holly Holm, but before that she was just running through girls. So it'll be interesting to see how it comes back, how she comes back. I don't think UFC wanted to risk her going in there and losing a fight perhaps, because the Ronda appeal was she was knocking girls out in under 30 seconds. So you want to capitalize on this return as much as possible.
What do you think's going to happen in this fight? I mean, they talked about Amanda Nunes running out of gas as well. She's a big puncher. Ronda likes to get it on. I mean, this is going to be epic because, as you mentioned, all eyes will be on this return.
This is a fight that is so tough to call, mainly because we don't know what Ronda Rousey looks like. She's obviously been away for over a year now, and the last time we saw her, she got knocked out cold, but before that, she was just a machine. Amanda Nunes obviously looked impressive in her last fight. If she keeps it standing, maybe she can do to Ronda what Holly Holm did, but I think if Ronda gets her hands on her, Nunes will probably go for a ride, and she'll probably get submitted.
And lastly, Chris, I'm on Twitter a lot. Chris Cyborg is circling a petition. She's very active on Twitter, asking for a 140 division in the UFC. She wants to fight Ronda Rousey. Do you think this Cyborg-Rousey fight will ever happen?
You know, we've been asking that for years. Will this fight ever happen? It seemed for a while that Ronda Rousey was ducking her. Cyborg finally now in the UFC. Then they were arguing over what weight they were going to fight at. I hope we do get to see this fight. Maybe if Ronda wins this one, she might give Cyborg her shot. But that's a dangerous, dangerous fight for Ronda. If there's anyone who's been even as close to dominant as Ronda, it's Cyborg. She's been knocking out girls for a lot longer than Ronda Rousey, and she's done it even more impressively, I would say.
I'm going to put you on the spot before I let you go. UFC 205, besides the Alvarez-McGregor title fight, do you have a fight of the night in mind?
Wow, there's so many to choose from there. The ones I'm really looking forward to are Donald Cerrone and Kelvin Gastelum. I want to see what Rashad Evans looks like again. He's kind of been out of it, I would say. So it'll be interesting to see if he can make another run at top contention. And then Chris Weidman is another guy I'm interested in seeing. But my fight of the night, I'm going to go for Cerrone versus Gastelum at the moment.
All right, Chris de Beer, the dawn of MMA and UFC sports betting, all the way from South Africa. Chris, man, thanks so much. We'll talk to you soon. And we'll get your predictions via social media before the fight, okay?
Yes, definitely. Thanks for having me back on the show.